Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today is March 22nd, and I wanted to record a video about, something that it's a role that I find it to be very much needed, which has to do with the whole idea of I guess they call it a solution architect, right? Or someone who has not just the understanding of cross-module configuration and some knowledge about what each module does and how do they fit together, but also from a process perspective has the ability to think about the full cycle, right? And today in particular, I wanted to talk about leave of absence, right? To be honest, I have no clue, right? What's the general status, right, of this level of sophistication around leave of absence for customers out there, but at least my experience is that it typically is configured at the most basic place, right? And as we know, leave of absence can get really complex, right? If the organization is big and decentralized, each region might have their own policies. Each business unit might have their own policies, which although is more rare nowadays. Of course, there are legal considerations in many countries. And of course, there are a number of leave types, right? So depending on how granular companies can be or want to be, it can get very, very complex. But what I wanted to focus today here is really what are some considerations that you should keep in mind once you're setting up leave of absence, but beyond the leave of absence itself, right? In the idea of cross-module integrations. And there are four, at least, that I wanted to bring up here for you to consider. Number one, LMS, right? I've seen it many times in which managers will get reminders or notifications that so-and-so is late on some training, but the reality is that they are in some type of leave. So how do you stop that clock, if you will? How do you prevent that from happening? Well, there are ways to do it. I'm not going to go into details here. If you want to know, feel free to email me and I'll be more than happy to show you how to handle that. But learning, right? And learning assignments. Time management, right? Are you able to schedule people or not? What impact does it have? Etc. Depending on the type of leaves. What if you put a date there and then the person that not coming back on that date? What impact does that have on the various schedules? That's another big consideration you should keep in mind. And it gets more complex because typically, if you're not using easy time, it might require some integration work to whichever provider you're using. This is a big one because I've spent a ton of hours this past, I'll say, month thinking about this one or doing work with this one, which has to do with compensation, right? And there are really two angles, right, that you need to keep in mind in terms of leave of absence. Number one, eligibility, right? Depending on which leave of absence, where, right? Are they the people eligible for merit, STI, LTI, different bonus types, whatever? Are they eligible or not? So eligibility as well as compensation calculations itself, right? Any prorations, right? Changes to eligible earnings, what have you, right? Which can be impacted by the number of days that they actually worked or depending on the type of leave, etc. And then payroll, right? So some type of leaves, do you pay them or not? All those rules, right? You need to bring them up to the surface. And of course, there are some or many of them that can get really, really complex, right? For example, you're looking at like in the US, and please don't quote me on none of this stuff because I'm not necessarily a policy expert and any change nor a legal expert, and it changes, right? Things change. But let's say if you're in the US and you're in military leave, right? Which can be short-term and long-term. You might, you might not be paid, or maybe you get paid a stipend, so you're not in the regular pay schedule, but you get a different type of pay, but you're still merit eligible, right? or potentially, right? You could, right? So anyways, here you're mixing different things. Oh, and one last item, it's not really a module that I wanted to talk about, is the whole statuses, right? Is the person active or inactive? Is it active for X purpose, but inactive for something else? If you're integrating with, let's say, SAP HCM payroll, are they active there but inactive in success factors or not? Or like, how do you code all that? Again, it can get very, very complex. Any downstreams that you're sending across, any feeds back through the HRIS sync, again, to control some of the behavior around the talent modules, so on and so forth, right? So many considerations, right, to keep in mind. Leave of absence can become a big project. So anyways, just wanted to share some thoughts that I had, just because it has come fairly frequently across a number of clients recently, questions about it. And I think it will be a really good business opportunity, by the way. If there was an easy way to do that, almost like a prepackaged set of rules, like here are the countries, here are the legal requirements, you have to have this, here's how you configure it. So here are some of the labeling that you should use, blah, blah, blah. And then here are some common practices, right? In the US, typically, like, for instance, one of the ones that become fairly, I thought it was, fairly common in the past year. It was if your visa expired in the US, right? So let's say if you're in an H-1B, right, or a work visa, and you were up for renewal, but because of COVID, you didn't get your visa renewed on time. Technically, you don't have a visa, which means that technically the company or legally cannot employ you, which means that you have to be inactive, which means that you have to leave the country, by the way, too. So you cannot be employed by the US legal entity. How do you handle that, right? Okay, you can't have the person on your payroll system actively. From an HRIS perspective, in case you get audited, you should be inactive. But that situation could change at any point in time, right? I was in the US, I went to Canada for, until I get my actual visa. Oh, actually, I got it a week after. Am I rehired? What event reason do I use? Or was it just coded as a leave of absence? Or both, right? Or then what about the mandatory, sexual harassment training that I had to do in New York that now I filed out of compliance? So like, it could get very, very complex. Now, I don't think everyone has it right, or at least haven't met any company. I've worked with really big ones, but it's absolutely worth coming up with some type of matrix or something that influence or help some, organizations figure some of these things out. Because I tell you, I've spent quite a bit of time looking at different scenarios here, and I personally don't have an answer. Now, if there is one, by the way, if you're watching this video and there's already a resource or some published rules or something, I would appreciate you put it on the comments or send me a note, because I'd love to take a look at it, advertise it, if you sell it, I'd love to learn about it. But anyways, just some thoughts about the whole leave of absence, because I think it's fascinating. It's fairly complex, it's right up to my alley. So that's what I have for today. I'll see you next time.